Orgasmic enlightenment, where the sexual and spiritual come together. I'm Kim Anami, and I'm a holistic sex and relationship coach and a vaginal weightlifter. In this show, we explore all things intimate. I believe that our sexual energy is life force, creative energy, and we can use it to shape our worlds, strengthen our relationships, and self-actualize. I blend the most avant-garde information from neuroscience, ancient sexual practices like Tantra and Taoism, to renegade wellness modalities to show you how to create gourmet sex in your lives. Come one, come all. Conscious birth, wild and free. A couple of years ago, I wrote a blog post on the most dangerous place to give birth. The answer was an American hospital. No joke. America has the highest infant mortality rate and the highest maternal death rate in the developed world. 1 of 2 kids have some kind of chronic disorder or disease like asthma, allergies, autism, or some kind of autoimmune condition. The allopathic medical system and OBGYNs in particular are selling you on the idea that you need their help in order to give birth. Their pitch is that the more control and the more we can interfere with the process, the better it is. Except that we know that's not true. Every bit of evidence we have shows us the opposite. In fact, the entire OBGYN profession was built on the idea that in order for them to even exist, they would have to systematically convince women that birth was too hard for them to do alone and that a doctor, surgically or otherwise interfering with the process would be to their advantage. This is a quote from the American Dr. Hodge from 1938. If these facts can be substantiated, if this information can be promulgated, if females can be induced to believe that their sufferings will be diminished or shortened, and their lives and those of their offspring, this is key, will be safer in the hands of the profession, there will be no further difficulty in establishing the universal practice of obstetrics. All the prejudices of the most ignorant and nervous female, all the innate and acquired feelings of delicacy so characteristics of the sex will afford no obstacle to the employment of male practitioners. This is the foundational principle of OBGYN medicine. Take the power out of the woman's hands and her vagina and create doubt in her own ability and her body's eons of genetic coding and wisdom that have set her up to instinctually know what to do in pregnancy and birth, and then base a whole business model on this. It's been this way for over a century. In the early 1900s, most births, 99%, took place at home. By the 1950s, it was 50%, and now only 1% and probably less of births take place in a woman's home. In the modern industrial birth setting, a woman is rarely, if ever, allowed to follow her own bodily rhythms and cues. Instead, she is subject to an arbitrary schedule with certain timelines. She's placed in a foreign environment where her body is much more likely to interpret her surroundings as unsafe, and in an evolutionary act of self-preservation, interrupt the birth process. We have a 33% C-section rate in women with hospital births. Hysterectomies and C-sections are in the 10 most common surgeries in the US. What the fuck is going on? Why are OBGYNs so obsessed with hacking up women's bodies? So I document the corruptness and uselessness of OBGYNs in my podcast episode called Real Cures versus Obsolete OBGYNs. I also go into more of why not to give birth in the hospital birth factory and on the empowerment of free and natural birth in the episodes What is Free Birth? As well as natural birth equals ecstatic birth. I explain how everything about a hospital birth goes contrary to our true natures and increases the chances exponentially of having complications. In today's episode, I am overjoyed to be going to the opposite end of the spectrum. We are talking about wild natural birth, the wildest. So wild, in fact, that we will be hearing about women giving birth in the Black Sea in Russia with dolphins for birth attendants. This sounds far more ideal and like a dream birth to me than any kind of clinical hospital experience. My guest is Elena Tonetti-Vladimirova, who is the founder and director of the constantly expanding international organization Birth into Being, which is dedicated to conscious evolution and the creation of a thriving future social structure based on love, compassion, and common sense. As a speaker, filmmaker, and author, Elena artfully uses multimedia to share her message with the world. Since 1982, Elena's tireless commitment has earned her the status of spiritual midwife to thousands, I would say probably millions of people. Through her lifetime of experiences, she has seen that birth complications are preventable. She has an incredible documentary film called Birth as We Know It, and she teaches the Birth into Being method. In my opinion, Elena's work is some of the most important contributions to humanity in helping to restore a woman's true power and reclaim the rebirthing and self-actualizing experience of sovereign childbirth in loving environments. We are reprogramming our species for pleasure and peace. Hello, Elena. It's fantastic to have you here today.
Hello, I am very grateful for this opportunity.
Well, I am so excited to be able to share your work and your vision and your incredible contributions to the return to power birth movement. So, the way that I see things is that we've come into this age, I'm sure you probably see them this way too, of really heavy industrialized, even techno birth. And in my view, your work and some of your past experiences are really polar opposite to that in terms of literally having births in nature. And when I was pregnant, this was exactly what I thought. I was like, I want to give birth in the forest near a waterfall. Like that was just the most, I was like, there's no way I would ever consider giving birth in a hospital. So, I think that so much of your work is really all about harmonizing into the natural flow. And to me, that alignment with nature is a really big part of that, which we'll get to throughout this interview. But first of all, let's just start out with what is your definition of conscious birth?
That's a very good question. Conscious birth is when both parents are fully present emotionally for each other and for the incoming soul. When they both are on the same page about this enormous event of becoming a portal for a whole new human being that did not exist before to come through. And when they both are aware of the impact of their lifestyle, of their relationship, how they connect with each other, of their environment, on the quality of life of this future human being. So it's really a high mastery to have a conscious birth. It's like if we're talking about the maximum, like birthing Olympic team, there is a lot of moving parts to that picture because they need to find the right timing, the right place. Time space is important to really connect with the soul of that incoming baby, because on some level the connection is already happening. It's already within pre-incarnational agreements that some being will come through them.
Mm-hmm.
Am I saying too much?
No, I mean, No, I think that's fine. I think that for some people, well, you're almost going back to the idea of conscious conception too, right? That, a couple can
Well, you
conceive.
can't take it out of the equation when
Yeah.
you're talking about conscious birth. Where does it start? It start, with conscious conception, because what we know now from the new science, from the new biology research, is that the new life actually begins a few months prior to conception, not even at conception, because the quality of the sperm and the egg is defined by the choices they make a few months prior to conceiving the child. Well, actually, the whole lifetime prior. So
Yeah.
it's like, where do we begin? But we have to start somewhere. So let's start a few months before conception. And that's a part of the equation, because, first of all, a woman really needs to um, be picky and choose the father of the baby consciously, intelligently, eh, with all the moving parts being in sync, in alignment. So it's a very big topic, actually. I can give the whole interview just on that part, because there is so much, we're paying very high price as a society, as a civilization, for taking conception and birth for granted, because there's so many people are being born. It's like, oh, whoops, another one. But that doesn't take away the pure mystery of conception and birth, because we actually don't know anything about it. We know what it looks like at every stage of conception and gestation and birth. But what it is actually driving the cell to recognize that particular sperm, because there is a moment when she has a choice and she chooses one of them.
To let
This
that one
is
in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an amazing mystery, because by the time he got there, it's like, imagine a big guy running through the whole length of Grand Canyon to find this tiny, tiny cave at the end of it, because the cervix opening is only the size of two sperm heads. So there's no GPS, in total darkness. They're running, right? They're
Yeah.
trying to find her,
Yeah.
and she's there only 2 days out of the month. So, but by the time he got there, they don't really have much energy to storm her, as they tell us, that they just make their way through, like penetrate and break the membrane. That membrane is the most impenetrable wall in the three-dimensional universe. It's designed to protect the egg for years and years and years, from the moment it was formed, when this woman was a fetus inside her mother's body, inside her grandmother's body. That's when the eggs are formed. So that membrane is designed to keep her unharmed, that nothing will get to her. So how is he supposed to get in right now, right? And that is an absolutely mystical experience. That is our home frequency, because at that moment she has to make the choice to fulfill her destiny. There is no agenda in her. She existed eternity, like on her time scale, that's eternity. And she's complete. She's uh, a whole universe. And at this moment, she has to completely cease to exist, you know? To let him in means that she will just explode in this flash. It's like nuclear reaction. It's explosion. It's pure ecstasy. She opens up and surrenders and takes him in, and he has to cease to exist. Nothing that they knew so far, he existed only for minutes or hours. She existed for years and years, But in that moment, they're two equal parts. He is activating her. He is here. He is like a key to this holy tower that was dormant. You know, that Cinderella story. That's that when
Right.
she slept. No, not Cinderella.
Sleeping
What's the
Beauty.
fairy tale? Sleeping Beauty. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one. That's about our conception. She was just there dormant, completely unattached to the outcome. And here he comes and he activates her in a way that she could not do by herself. And she is the universe, but she needs to have that speck of consciousness in that particular time space
So,
in order to get the whole show on the road.
so do you think there's some kind of knowing and relationship, like an energetic acknowledgement or recognition between the two on this ultra microcosmic level that she
Yeah,
selects, she feels something, the egg, and lets in that particular sperm?
there is really no any other way to think about it because, well, with our human minds, we can't really comprehend the way our bodies function. There is at any given split second, there's trillions of operations happening, and we can just, pretend that we know something, but what's happening there is so much more complex, and it's outside of our comprehension. Really, we can bow and surrender to the mystery and just pat ourselves on the on the back, because every one of us is a huge success story. We made it through this improbability. Every human being walking this earth right now is one in about 400,000 trillion, something like this incomprehensible amount of zeros under that four. And we did it because not only he found her and she decided to take him up on his offer, then she had to go on this odyssey, on this journey, find the uterus, attach herself successfully, because a lot of pregnancies end up before a woman even knows that she was pregnant, because, okay, I got there, I attached, but oops, didn't work. So, and then the body starts forming, and that's like, oh my God, every next wave of the cell division is that absolutely ecstatic, the frequency of that experience is, again, beyond of anything we can, it's the ultimate high. So this is our home frequency. We are made in pure ecstasy, because that's what calls forth a cell division, that fluctuation in the range of frequencies where it's just pure bliss. And yeah.
I was going to say, what do you wish that people knew about conception that they generally don't know?
Well, that
Yeah.
it's magic, that it's mystery, that it's something to be deeply grateful and respectful of. It's really, really greatly overlooked, and we're paying for it, because if we knew how magical each one of us is, we wouldn't be treating each other the way we're treating each other out there in the world.
So let's back up, and could you share with us a synopsis of your history and your journey? Like, how did you become interested in the realm of natural birth, and to get to the place to me, of stripping away so much of the conditioning and programming that people are, given to get to, being in the Black Sea in a community away from all civilization, and women birthing their babies in the water there.
That's a long story, because it didn't happen just like that. When I stumbled upon the subject of birthing, that was the last thing on my mind, because I was a successful actor. That's my official education, theater acting. And I thought that theater would be my lifelong occupation. But I was married to a wonderful, amazing man who was a leader of this very interesting brainstorming technology organization. They were called Games. I actually have an article about it on my website. It's called Russian Games. I wrote about it. But with his ability to take an issue, and he had a whole team of people, they were working together, and they could figure out how to do something, how to create something, how to help organization to come from being on the edge of bankruptcy into the space of success. And somebody asked me to bring this water birth pioneer, Igor Cherkovsky, who was going around with this idea of water birth since 1962. And the way he was going about it wasn't getting him any attention. And the person who asked me to help him had my ultimate respect. So I agreed to listen to him and see what we can do for him, just out of respect to this person. I met with him thinking that it would be something for a short 20-minute conversation. I ended up listening to him for 4 hours, and then I brought him home and said, well, this is really, really, really important that we put some energy and attention to this, because everything we're trying to do is just like putting band-aids on a full body catastrophe, burn. We need to really, I got it. In 4 hours, he really downloaded to me the whole concept of pre and perinatal psychology, that the way we make people is keeping us in the same level of misery that we've been for thousands of years. He really showed me the connection between the way we're born and the way we function, the way we live, the way we love or are unable to love. And it was basically, he was talking about things that are most important in our life. Whether business will succeed or not, that's, good thing. But whether we're able to love or not, that seemed to be rooted into much, much deeper layers than I've ever looked at. And at the end of our discussion and connection, I just dropped everything and put all my time, attention, energy into creating this school of conscious parenting. That's what it was called in 1982 in Moscow. And the way we spilled out from Moscow into the Black Sea was that when those pregnant women that started to come to our classes, at some point we had classes going, it was women who gave birth in the water in their bathtub in the bathrooms, were just eager to help other women to have that experience. But to prepare for that, there was certain things that needed to happen during pregnancy. And one of the main things was neutralizing birth trauma, not only from a pregnant woman, but from her partner and from everybody who is going to be present at birth and involved in this baby's life, because the more we experienced of how things work in this realm, the more the picture began. It's not just about birth, it's about pregnancy. Then it was, oh, it's about conception. Oh, it's about how you actually meet your partner, because turns out that our limbic attractor, it's the mechanism that attracts us to certain people and repels us from other people, is actually rooted in our limbic brain, in our limbic imprint that we receive from conception through the first few years of life. Isn't it amazing that now you think, oh, I like this guy, I don't like this guy. It turns out that the roots of this likes and dislikes are right there.
So in your limbic imprint, so meaning that the conditions of conception, the conditions of pregnancy, then what happens during the birth are all creating the limbic imprint of the child, and that then goes on to be a receiver, transmitter, attractor, decision maker on an unconscious level of who we then also choose to reproduce with, or partners in sexuality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it turns out that one of the main ingredients in this dance of energies are the relationship of the parents with each other. Turns out that the fetus inside mama is responding to all the fluctuations of her, well, there is chemical equivalent, how much dopamine, how much serotonin, how much adrenaline her brain is producing, depending on whether she's in conflict with the father of the child, whether she's in conflict within herself about this pregnancy, whether she wants this pregnancy or not. And that will be reflected on the quality of their communication. And the baby absorbs all of those messages, chemical messages, and not only absorbs them, but automatically registers them and memorizes them. Not cognitively, not with the cortex, like our, the way you remember somebody's phone number, because cortex is not there yet, not for a few years, fully functional cortex, right? But it's the limbic memory, it's cellular memory, it's chemical memory. And from what I understand at this point, that this limbic imprinting is happening due to the property of water to maintain memory. I'm sure you heard of that water is able to keep memory, right?
Yes.
And that has something to do with the way not just the one molecule of water has that ability, but the number of molecules of water form a structure depending on the frequency of the experience. So, in other words, the environment dictates what structure those molecules of water will assume. And that structure remains in the body. And babies are like 99% water. There is not much less. That's why it's so that's why it's called imprint, is just really settles in the body on this molecular level. That's why it's so hard to talk yourself out of, like, if you're imprinted for liking a certain type of a man, say if the father was abusive to the mother, right? So the baby girl inside the mother is absorbing that chemistry of being abused as comfort zone, as the way to survive. That's where it roots, because limbic imprint is nature's merciful mechanism of allowing the species to thrive and survive, because Mama bear cannot send her cub to school, right? The cub is learning to be a bear by just being in the field and
Right.
absorbing the information that is happening around. So that mechanism of learning like crazy, they have an incredible learning capacity, all the small creatures, because their survival depends on it. Whether they will be able to procreate depends on this. So it's nature at work at its finest. So this imprinting, it's not like here to set us up for failure. It's here to help us to thrive and survive, because the nature was not expecting domestic violence
Right.
and wars and famine
Right.
and um, that we would start killing each other, and hurting each other. That's It's very rarely that the species turns against their own.
Right.
It's just humans are very special that way. And so this is designed for us to actually learn to be and become. And that's why it's so strong. So if it's a natural flow of things and we're born into love, then we learn to love that way. If a woman is born well, she knows everything about giving birth by being born, because that's how things work. It's already imprinted. Her body knows how to give birth. But if she was not born well, then her body might be in this like highly radioactive, multi-dimensional background radiation all her life, and she would not even know that until it comes to getting pregnant. So from her own birth, on the cellular memory, she might be carrying the memory that birth is terrifying, horrible, like near-death experience, that we don't know how to do it, especially if there was drug, some kind of numbing agent that knocked out and disoriented and completely turned off all the sensory apparatus and participation in the process. That's what's very important, that a woman giving birth is fully present and participatory, because then her zest for life is activated to its absolute maximum. And that is the chemistry that activates that zest for life, a very, very important ingredient in a human being. That enthusiasm to be in the body, the desire to live, explore, be creative, be sexual, be everything. It's like we can go through life on autopilot, or we can actually be fully engaged and loving it. That's the difference. But medical profession doesn't really recognize the difference. They think if the baby didn't die, that's a success. But if the baby didn't die but was never activated in this raw primal sense, then there will be failure to thrive in one form or the other.
Right. Like what you're talking about then becomes the imprinting of dissociation, right?
Right.
Of not
Right.
being connected, of feeling unease in one's body. And that can be then an imprint that, and I would say, judging by the look of our culture, the amount of sort of addiction, habits that people have that are very dissociative, like that's most people. And we know that in our
Right.
modern culture, most people are born in traumatic circumstances, whether they're legitimate or manufactured, right, in the industrial birth setting. That's the imprinting that most people have right now in the world.
Exactly. That's why we see so much atrocities and just simply absence of common sense, the way our civilization is making those sharp, crazy turns. Because when you are not present in your body, you're not able to make sound decisions. And discern right from wrong. And that is actually upgraded to status of norm right now. I
Yeah.
saw with my own very eyes the textbook on psychology from medical school that says that women are not able to give birth naturally, period. That humans are not equipped with ability to discern right from wrong, that they need to be told. These are all in writings, all those things, like that the umbilical cord at birth needs to be clamped immediately, which is a capital crime against humankind, because up to 2/3 of baby's blood is still in the placenta. But don't get me started on this one. That's
Right.
that's a
So
very big
delayed
subject.
cord clamping is a more natural way, or, whatever people
It's unnatural because,
to clamp it.
where do you see that a cat or a deer or a tiger would clamp the umbilical cord? It needs time to keep pushing the blood from placenta into the baby's body. But if we clamp the cord, then the placenta is heavier, and they're sold by the weight into the
Gosh.
cosmetics industry. Yeah, but the problem is not about somebody making money on that baby's blood. The problem is that the baby's lungs are not ready for that first breath. So it's a major assault on the baby's system, because the amniotic fluids are inside. They need to drain the lungs that were squished during delivery through
Yeah.
the really narrow birth canal.
Yeah.
They need to, relax, open up. Everything needs to unfold, and gently, slowly.
Yeah.
It's like everything is brand new. All the nerve endings are still brand new, and they're very, very sensitive. Some research says up to 150 times more sensitive than we are, because we're already quite hammered by the sensory
Yeah.
overload left and right. But the baby is brand new, and everything hurts at that moment. The sounds, the lights, the touch, the rough surfaces, everything. But if you're forced to take a breath with lungs that are not ready for it, it's a real very big trauma for the
Right.
body, for the brand new body.
So let's wind back to Moscow. So you were learning these things and having these classes, and it sounds like, as part of your training or educating with people, is helping them to clear their limbic imprinting. So how did that then transition you from being in the center of Moscow to out in the wilderness?
Well, we didn't really know. Everything was discovery. There was nobody to ask questions. There was no internet. There was no body of research that is available right now through the field of prenatal psychology. There was nothing in the 80s in Moscow. It was basically just learning from every couple that was crazy enough and brave enough to
Right.
come in and step into this like unknown, uncharted territory. And everything was had to be found first. What works, what needs to work, in what area, how, what works for some people and doesn't work for others, what worked for the most of people. So it was very tedious process of discovery, part of which was learning to meditate. And that was a really big thing, like revolutionary, because in the 80s in Soviet Moscow, the word meditate was not even heard of or known. And learning to meditate was, again, there was no teachers. There was just a concept that something needs to happen, that we need to like shift our ordinary state of mind, of being, into some kind of heightened state of awareness. What it is, we don't know. How it is, we don't know. And just let's just sit down and close your eyes and figure out what's going to happen. So, but when you really have a clear intention, answers come, and they were coming by dozens and hundreds, and there was a lot of answers that were received in those deep states of meditations. And one of them that was reported by basically every single pregnant woman that was coming into the circle, that if they go into this deeply meditative state, they were seeing dolphins. Just they were seeing their babies, their fetuses, surrounded by dolphins, playing with dolphins. The fetus was a dolphin. There was a lot of information coming about dolphins. And you got to understand that if you live in California or in Fiji, dolphins are kind of part of
Right.
your environment. Not so much in Moscow in the dead of winter. It's like we didn't know anything about dolphins, as far as we were concerned. That was just another type of fish.
Yeah.
And there was this, dolphins, dolphins, dolphins. And at some point, the cumulative number of those accounts at some point added up to this spoken. Igor Cherkovsky, he said, well, let's go to where dolphins are. Let's try to actually connect with them and see what happens. So we started looking where dolphins are and found a dolphinarium on the Black Sea, but we were not allowed there. And we kind of danced around it, but we were not allowed there, especially to give birth in there. It's like, okay, there's a mental institution to the right, But at some point, Igor said, you know what? Let's just go to the Black Sea and camp somewhere on the beach and meditate and ask dolphins to connect. And that's exactly what we did and what happened. And the first year, they did not respond at all. Dolphins, I totally understand them too. They didn't think much of people because the only people they knew were fisheries, those the boats that were actually killing dolphins because they didn't want them in their nets. They were like weeds. On the second, actually halfway through the second year, I was there 4 months, basically from mid-May to mid-September at the camp in the Black Sea. And about halfway through, they connected with pregnant women only, not with us. I was never pregnant at the camp. I was one of the organizers, but they went into very beautiful, harmonious connection with pregnant women, and then they started coming when the labor would start. Somebody in the birth camp would go into labor, and sure enough, they're coming and just staying as close as they can. Allow the depth, because we were in shallow lagoons, but they would come as close as they could, and they stayed and jumped and sung and played and just stayed there in like deep stillness. And we did not really have a way of articulate what was happening, but the anxiety that would come with the new water broke, with the new word that somebody else is going into labor, there would be this agitation in the camp, and it's like, never know the outcome. But they would come and everything would just relax and calm down, and it would be a palpable sensation, like almost kinesthetic physical sense of incredible support and rightness of what we're doing, and just pure high. You know, if you look around, you see that there's tears in their eyes, just pure happiness, tears of pure happiness, just felt amazing. There was no drugs, you know, to eliminate that question. There was absolutely no drugs. But it would be just this incredible experience of complete and utter coherence, and just this undeniable rightness of being. You know, you are in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing, and there is absolutely nothing that can go wrong. And nothing ever went wrong. That's the thing. That's the most amazing thing, that there was no plan B. There was absolutely no way out of there. And if something happens, like when I'm asked, what if something happened? But that's the thing. We actually didn't have medical education. We were not contaminated with pictures of pathology. So we were so naive. There was absolutely no like concept that something can go wrong.
I love that. And I love the reinforcement of, because I think that's such a major problem, you know, both the limbic imprinting, as you speak of, but the conscious messaging that people get when we watch movies or television shows of a woman in birth and she's screaming her lungs out and it's a major crisis and catastrophe and it's like the most pain she's ever had. And so those kinds of images are, they're laid down in the psyche and, you know, can get reactivated in birth. But I love that, you know, being out in nature and even the energy of water, you know, there's a beautiful quote from you that I noted when talking about water birth. The woman herself becomes very water-like, resilient and fluid, and it melts down all of the frozen structures in her emotional landscape and her rivers flow effortlessly. And I think that's such a beautiful way of talking about then, you know, even receiving that energy or teaching from the water as perhaps was being taught by the dolphins, right? These influences instead from the natural world, reminding us of that flow.
Yeah. I can see you watched my movie.
Everyone ought to. It's one of the best birth movies ever made.
The Birth as We Know It, the whole DVD is almost 4 hours long. I really squeezed a lot of information there, so highly recommend.
And you guys were filming. You guys were filming at the Black Sea, so you have actual footage of these births.
At some point we had footage because we didn't have a camera and nobody we knew had a camera. It's like camera was something, an article of unknown level of luxury. But at some point, much later in the year, I think by like 87, one of the German midwives, or maybe American, I don't remember. There was a lot of foreign midwives coming to the Black Sea to study with us. And one of them realized that we don't have a camera, and she just took all the tapes that she made there and left the camera behind. Bless her heart. I don't even remember who that was, but thanks to her, we have all the footage that we have. But that's not much. Basically, in Birth as We Know It, I used, I have 11 births, and that's basically it, because most of the births would come at night, and we didn't have sufficient lighting for it, or women didn't want to be filmed, which is very understandable. The majority of women did not want to have a camera there and a camera person. So the fact that we have those few births from the Black
Mm.
Sea, it's like, bless the
Gold.
heart. I'm
Yeah.
incredibly grateful.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So you've talked about, and I agree with this, that birth is really the ultimate high if it's allowed to be. And so, how does opening ourselves as sexual beings, or even just allowing the birth process to happen, help to facilitate a pleasurable birth?
Well, it doesn't start at birth. There is not much you can do when you already go into labor. All the work needs to happen prior to ideally conception, or at least during pregnancy. Why I'm saying prior to conception is because ideally, a woman and her partner, the father of the baby, which ideally is the same person, have already established a very healthy, strong sexual connection, that they're literate in their sexual body language, in their understanding how the sexual energy works, and they acquired some degree of mastery of of navigating this enormous power, their sexuality. Sexuality is an enormous power. And unfortunately, we lack education. It's not in mass. It's just a few people that break through the social taboos and educational taboos and go into that place of mastery of navigating their sexual energy. So ideally, the partners are very familiar, which will actually help them sustain their deep connection and intimacy throughout the postpartum period.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that when I speak and I work with couples, and there's this myth, I would say, out there that's quite common for people, where they just assume that, or they've received a lot of examples of couples after a baby is born who grow apart, right? There's no sex, there's no intimacy, they grow apart. And I say, well, if a couple is really close and intimate and strongly sexually connected prior to a birth, that doesn't happen. But that's very rare. Like you kind of said, the sexual Olympics or the birth Olympics is that, for when people have that connection, that's what they actually need as the glue to get them through pregnancy, and then to have this transformative, transcendent birth, and then in postpartum. And yet, for the average couple, they're not that sexually connected. And so they get all kinds of things that come up for them, like even Madonna horror, triggers, right? As soon as the woman gets pregnant, she has to deal with all that. And then you've got probably, if she hasn't dealt with her birth trauma, or she's had birth trauma, she'll be activated. He could be activated in pregnancy. Then they'll go through a typical birth experience, which is going to normally be some kind of violence or a violation or crisis. And so then they've got that to deal with. And so then they come out of, and I really believe that that's what postpartum depression is. It's more like PTSD than some kind of natural outflow of the birth experience. This is manufactured from all of this accumulated stuff that hasn't been really dealt with, right? And people go through unconsciously these experiences. And so, but on the contrary, when people have done this kind of resolution, both within their relationship, they've activated, as you say, or catalyzed the sexual component of their relationship. So this becomes their sanctuary, this becomes their superpower. And then they've done the work around clearing birth energy or prior birth experiences in themselves. Then I believe they have that potential to move forward into these initiating and really self-actualizing experiences, truly rebirthing themselves, in a very powerful and positive way, except that's not what most people have. And this goes, back to our original definition of what is conscious birth, right? And it's the whole process of conscious conception, conscious pregnancy, conscious birth, and then all of that work really in preparation goes into then birthing everything that follows then, becomes a product of that work. And this is probably the most undervalued, unacknowledged work that humans don't do, in the entire world for our species.
Right. And there is also two more things to add to that mix, that it's not only birth trauma that gets activated, it's sexual trauma that gets activated by pregnancy and birth.
Right.
Because we have unforgivably high statistics of rapes. And it's very difficult if a woman never had a chance to really process it and neutralize the trauma from rape. It's going to raise its ugly head at birth. And it's really, really important to find a way to dealing with rape trauma and heal the physical tissue, the emotional impact from that experience. It's very difficult to come through with flying colors, but it's really necessary if we're talking of the big picture, what is conscious birth, that we need to really come to terms with our past and leave it in the past for the sake of our future. Really, it's important. But also I wanted to add that it's not only difficult births that leave a woman in the severe postpartum depression. It can even happen if the birth was good, but the connection with the partner gets altered at birth, depending on his ability to show up, to be present. See, if a woman is doing all her work, but the guy thinks that, oh, I can handle it, nothing is gonna, faze me. But it happened a few times. I also thought that severe depression is only affecting after difficult birth. Mm-hmm. But what happens is that if a woman is doing her part, but the guy is kind of winging it, their relationship, it means that there was something between them, in that space between them, where she was not really feeling met. Because there would be an amazing activation of her as life-giving creator. She would become everything that she was born to be. The giving birth empowered way activates a woman that she had no concept of. Everything that she was before, she will have like the whole other dimension opening for her. And in their relationship, the guy will be expecting her to go back to where she was.
Right.
And she can't. She doesn't want to. With the activation of her full goddess self, he is finding himself in a very complicated place, because he is used to a young maiden that was maybe lacking some confidence, or maybe was not very clear of who she is and what she is to do in life. And giving birth connects all the dots for her, and all of a sudden he is meeting this full-grown queen in his kitchen. And their dynamic needs to change. It needs to shift. It needs to, accommodate everything she has become. And a man, again, doesn't have that many tools or role models or intelligent guides to help him meet his woman in her new place in life. So that is something that is very important to bring to our attention for couples that are really thinking and planning on conscious birth. There is, as I said, so many moving pieces in that, because then if you have a beautiful birth, then you don't want to have this baby exposed to your yelling at each other and divorcing and connecting, disconnecting, and leaving. That baby, beautifully born, needs the stability and reliability of an emotional presence of both parents. That's what conscious birth is.
Well, what can the fathers do? Because I think that for women, as they're pregnant, they're naturally being catalyzed, right? Like you'd almost have to fight against growth to not be transformed through pregnancy, or you'd have to have a lot of blockages, and maybe they do, right? Like around, say, Madonna whore or sexual trauma, all of these things, and then not deal with them to really squelch that process of evolution that's naturally propelling her forward, right? As she's building a new life within her body, she'd have to really try hard to suppress that energy that's pushing her towards growth and evolution. And then for the man, it reminds me of your original analogy of like the cells coming together and cell division, right? Like all this stuff happening. What can he be doing then? I mean, we've talked about his own birth trauma potentially getting activated. Circumcision trauma would be another trauma that he would sustain, but what would his work be then while he's along the journey of pregnancy with her, so that he can meet her and keep pace with her as she does metamorphose into this beautiful new goddess being, and that she walks out of that experience with a king rather than a young prince who was maybe sidelined or felt impotent during the birth experience, which I think, again, in most hospital settings, the father would be, right? He would be shoved aside for, oh, there, you just sit in the corner and shut your mouth and we'll deal with this. So what do you suggest for men to help really ensure that they emerge as well as a transformed king?
First of all, educate himself. Just really learn about postpartum period, about what, like, there is a lot of information online. Get involved with some men's group, some support group of young fathers, where they can just have some men time and share and talk and help each other. It's really, really important to have some kind of support groups, some circle, other than just watching football together and yelling at the TV, or having the guy beer time. It's really important to bring it into, like, try to brainstorm together and connect the dots. Like, this is what I'm dealing, this is what I found I can do, and this is what I read this book. You guys have to read this book because it explains a lot, and there is a lot of information. And it's important to know that they're not the first one, not the only one, that every single first time father is in this situation because he has to invent the bicycle, how to be with the woman who doesn't know who she is yet. That's one of the biggest pieces, is that a woman, after giving birth, she goes through a complete identity crisis. Like, everything she was is no more, and she is now in that uncharted territory. She has to assemble herself piece by piece all together. She has to, like, make a lot of decisions on who she is, how she is, what is happening with her in her life with this man. It's basically just everything is brand new, because it's not only the baby was born, it's the mother was born. It's kind of a cliche, right, but that's true. And the man needs to, first of all, comprehend that it's not going to be going back to how it was. He has an opportunity to really experience something so profound, so big, so important for him, becoming a father, and activate his his spirit's purpose for embodiment, to really like step up the game and get to know, you know, his place in this world. It's a very big topic what he can do, but in like in my terms, in my trainings, first of all, he needs to neutralize his own birth trauma. He needs to clear his relationship with his parents, because the lingering, that background radiation of conflicts with his parents is going to come into his relationship with the woman and the baby and his work. It's going to now really play a number. So he needs to clear his childhood owies, you know, everything that comes up. Bubbles are surfacing and trying to leave the bottom floor of the marshes, and he needs to really help it up and clear the waters of his the way he runs his energy, and his relationship with, like, all the childhood relationship. Actually, it's not just with parents. It could be grandparents. It could be guardians that raised him. It could be siblings. Sometimes it's older siblings that have caused more trauma than actual parents. Sometimes it's the best friend that betrayed in first grade, or you know, some kind of first grade love of my life that betrayed me. All of a sudden it's activated to the point that it's like blinding him, and it's so present that he can't see through that, and he starts acting out that hurt from that time. So what needs to happen is bringing all those bubbles one by one into his awareness, and really neutralizing its impact on his nervous system, and the means that he finds for it, you know, whatever he can get help with, because there is a lot that a person can do by themselves, but there comes a point when you just need to be held. There comes the point when the actual healing comes, when you find somebody who is able to hold you the way you needed to be held back then. That is what seals the deal. You know, everything else could be just mental construction and kind of, you know, trying to talk your way out of it. But the trauma happened before the ability to, like, articulate came into place. So in order to address those primal wounds, there has to be this kinesthetic experience of being in a place of trust, surrender, warmth, being touched, held, loved. Just have the actual alternative experience, you know, just put that new experience into that place where the hurt happened in the first place.
Right.
So, yeah.
So let's wrap up with the most positive vision of the birth experience that you can imagine. Like, I think we've touched on it a little bit in here, but you know, the concept that most people, like, we've, you know, are programmed to see birth as pain and discomfort rather than pleasure, right? And so what can we leave people with as the inspiration of what's really possible? Like, the most ultimate, you know, as birth is the greatest source of ecstasy or spiritual awakening or bliss, like, how would you frame that for people?
Well, suffering in birth is just a bad habit. And the main thing is recognizing that actually our hormonal supplement is there to release the absolutely obscene amounts of oxytocin when the birth comes in. That's exactly what our nature is supposed to be doing. That's why we're talking about bliss, orgasmic ecstasy during birth, because there is absolutely no drug that can enable that amount of oxytocin in the bloodstream. It's like it's the ultimate high. That's what allows a woman to just, open up to that degree. That's what nature is supposed to do. The only reason why the other thing happens, it's again, there is the same chemistry lab in the brain, and it cannot produce oxytocin if it's already producing adrenaline and all the stress hormones. So if the lab is occupied pumping stress chemistry, you can't switch it. You have to start training your brain. Basically, homework is pleasure. To start training the body to produce vast amounts of oxytocin, because if there was life of no pleasure prior to birth, the body simply does not produce enough oxytocin. It's just kind of like with every muscle, use it or lose it. It's like if you don't exercise your biceps or triceps, they atrophy, they become weak and kind of not very useful. So it's the same with pumping oxytocin. You have to train that muscle. You have to figure out every single way you can know pleasure, because you probably know every cell of the skin has a pleasure receptacle. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, of course. So we have to find every one of them. And that's the birth preparation.
I love it. So the birth preparation is to experience as much pleasure as you can, have as many orgasms, generate as much oxytocin and ecstasy as a way of rewiring our systems.
Right, but not necessarily in receiving pleasure, but in just receiving pleasure, don't get me wrong. Yeah, bring it on. But the removing the internal taboo on pleasure.
Yeah,
That's a very big piece, because we can get as many massages as we want, but if we internally are not giving ourselves permission to enjoy having the body, it's gonna just be,
friction.
okay, it's on the skin, it's great, but in order to start really increasing that flow of oxytocin, we need to just destroy all the dams and taboos that we allowed ourselves to adopt due to somebody else's ideas of what's good, what's not good. So it's basically a revolution. It's internal revolution to shed off all those notions that are not even ours. It's like, you know what? I think it's so 80s, I'm just going to lose it. It's out of style.
Yeah.
Pleasure. Pleasure is the new.
Pleasure's in. Pleasure's the new black.
Pleasure is the new black. Yeah. So yeah, just really learning to love life, your own body, to really like getting to know every which way the body can experience being loved and pleasured. It's like, yeah, sky is the limit.
Fantastic. I love it. Thank you so much, Elena. You just have so much wonderful information and inspiration to share with the world, and I'm so grateful for your contributions to humankind.
Thank you for this opportunity to be heard. I appreciate every one of them. Thank you.
Excellent.
All right. Bye.
How inspiring was that? To know that you have the power. You always have. The Sexy Mama Salon is open for registration today. This 8-week online salon I have created is a step-by-step guide in how to deprogram yourself and learn instead to tune into all of your natural wisdom and to cultivate your sexual power and pleasure as the ultimate birthing tool. Blocks that show up in your bed will show up in your birth, meaning if you have sexual blocks with yourself and between you and your partner, they will have an impact on your birthing experience, just like they have an impact on your ability to orgasm, on your libido, and the quality of your relationship. Yes, they will also have an impact on the biggest orgasm of your life, childbirth. The Sexy Mama Salon dives deep into everything you need to know to have a healthy and blissful pregnancy and birth, as well as how to heal and fortify your sexual relationship with yourself and your partner to create the most optimal and ecstatic birth experience. You can sign up for the salon at kiminami.com under Sexual Savant Salons and then look for Sexy Mama.